Hi everyone, Zeke Torres, and this segment is about other syntax from the perspective of a SAS user, right? So at this point, what we want to look at or discuss, and actually I would love to talk to more people about this, is we have a project that we are trying to manage and start. In this case, I'm going to use the idea of the other SAS Global Forum example. And we're a team where now we're starting to see Python, now we're starting to see R, maybe there's some SQL code around. So how would the same repository handle that diversity of syntaxes? We're focused on SAS because that's the legacy way that we've done things, but now we're starting to see other people on our team join us, and they're contributing code that isn't always SAS. So how would a team manage that influx of code with the same repository? So let's look at my Git repository. In this case, it's empty. Remember, this is one of the examples that we set up earlier. I'm on the main branch. I'm going to go ahead and fetch. Remember, that's one of the rules that we have, that before we start to do any work, we fetch. I'm going to take a look at it again in my Explorer, and it's pretty empty. I haven't done anything yet. It's just basically a shell. It doesn't have anything going on it. But I'm going to go ahead and I'd like to start to set up some mock examples of code with a diverse set of syntaxes in folders that I'd like to recommend. And again, if other people have some better practices or better ways of doing things, please hit me up in the comments, because I'd really like to find out what you've done, how you've made those improvements, or what you've tried, so we can share and kind of see what each different teams are doing or other people are doing. So I'm going to create a branch called ZT folder layouts, and I'm going to go ahead and create it. Whoop, hang on a second here. New branch. There we go. And there we go. Create a new branch, and it's off the main branch, but the main branch is empty. This is a new repository. So in the Explorer, I now want to create a folder for code. And in the code folder, if I go there, I'd like to create a Readme. It'll be an empty one. That way it will trigger my GitHub desktop to notice there's a change. And normally what I like to do in the README is put some kind of description as to what I'm doing in that folder. So I'll add something like, and I know these comments are very SAS centric, but this is the code folder for any number of syntax. And so I'll indicate that we're going to set one up for SAS, Python, R, and let's say SQL. And then we're going to create one called universal, and I'll explain what that is in a second. And in some team installations where I've talked to the teams and worked out some rules, we may want to indicate what the latest version of something is that we have installed, or where to start from. So this text file is meant to be kind of pseudo team documentation. So here we might say we're on version 9.4, and maybe indicate what release, or what the TM is, or something else of that nature. If it's meant to run in a specific way, Python, we might do like a 3 dot something, whatever that is. Same with R, SQL, and so on. And again, universal is meant to be not specific to any language. So we'll talk more about that when I get to what I mean by the universal folder. So I've saved that. Now I'm going to create the folders for our SAS syntax. I'm going to create the folder for our Python. I'm going to create the folder for our SQL, and the folder for our R language. And then I'm going to create that universal folder. And what I would recommend, at least some of the things that I've done in the past, is I've created some scripts that will generate this environment with the correct project naming and allow the folders to kind of cascade. And the reason why I recommend we follow a consistent standard is so that this way we can use relative file path naming. And we'll get to that in one of the later segments, but I'm going to put another README file in each one of these so that it actually pings and triggers the Git repository via GitHub Desktop so that I know there's a change there. But in the README, I want to indicate that this is our universal folder for elements and files that are agnostic to any language. And so what this is going to be is a place or a folder where we can hold things like lists of states or lists of codes for client statuses or anything of that nature. That's where it's going to go. Obviously, our SQL code is going to have SQL code. And again, the purpose of this README is to trigger a change in my GitHub repository. So I have something to lock it down with. And so I'm going to type in that this is our SQL code. And I'm going to do the same for each of the other folders. So go into code. We need a SAS one. And if you already have SAS code or if you already have code that belongs there, that will act as enough of a trigger. But one of the reasons why I like to have a README is because it starts to act as a common place to document key code facts or key element facts. I'll save that. And just a couple more here. I believe we have the Python and the R to do. This will be our R language. And then we have the last one, which will be Py. And when I close this, eventually you're going to see the GitHub Desktop pop with the various changes that we've obviously made to this. And so that is done. So we've added a folder called code for our project called SAS Global Forum Example 2, where our Git repository is at that level. We have a README. The code folder has Python, R, SAS, SQL, and a universal folder. And again, universal is meant to hold things like a state list, a zip code list, a list of hospitals, a list of something that can be used by all of the syntax that are available for this project. So we also need, for at least the SAS language, we want to have a logs folder, and that's where we would put SAS logs concerning production. Now we might put a SAS logs folder underneath this if we want to keep iterative work here. That really depends on your team preferences, but for sure we want to keep it at the highest level because that would indicate things that have been run as part of production or part of a deliverable. They weren't just and it could be anything. It could be SQL logs, it could be any kind of log. It would go into logs. And here's where I know this might confuse some people, and I want to stress that we're not violating one of the rules that we have. We do not want to put data inside of a Git repository, but we are going to create a data folder. And I know that sounds like the opposite of what I just said as far as we're going to create a data folder. And in our data folder, instead of actually putting data, we're going to put shortcuts or .lnks. And for our Unix friends, we're going to put basically symbolic links. Now, the reason why I prefer to do this is because it allows me to manage via the .git ignore what I will eliminate from having Git actually track and manage. So I'm going to pick this folder. This folder has some SAS tables that I'm working on. And so I've created a shortcut, basically a symbolic link. And when I do that, I'm going to give it the name. This is the name of the folder that I want to use. It's the consistent folder. And so I'm going to create another one just for the sake of showing you what that looks like. And it's going to be basically back in the same place. It's just one other folder down. Let's see if we can find it. There we go. I'll save that one as well. And I've got two folders, DESO1 and DESO2. And again, I'm not putting the data in the repository. I'm keeping things in this folder layout and using a data folder that is real. But within the data folder, I'm using shortcuts or symbolic links if we're on Unix. Because once I actually initiate a .git ignore, I can eliminate those from being kept or stored in the repository. Now let's close this window, and our GitHub desktop will actually pop with all the various changes that we have. There we go. So we have 8 changed files. Let's take a look at what they are. We've done these, right? It's the readme from that code /Python. It's the code /R readme. It's the code /readme at the very top level. It's the readmes that we saw that now are there to actually populate. But look at this. Even if I were to include the .lnk or the symbolic link into the repository, it wouldn't bring in the data. It won't. But we don't actually want to even include the .lnk or the shortcut because, it's just a lot cleaner to remove that from being the case. So what we want to do is go back to the folder. Where are we? We want to come here. We want to create a new file, a .git ignore. And when we go inside of that file, we're basically going to put a star.lnk. And, for the sake of just protecting ourselves, we're going to put a SAS7 BDAT. We want to ignore those two. Those don't belong in our repository. So in case something happens where we have that added, that'll be something that we'll go ahead and ignore. And so we're going to go ahead and close that. In our Git repository view via GitHub Desktop, I hope you noticed that those went away. The GitHub showed up. I'm sorry, the Git ignore showed up. But those two files that were links that we created, those shortcuts that we created, those are now being excluded by that wildcarding. Okay. And so what'll happen also is that anything that's a star.sas7bdat will also be excluded. And so what we might end up doing is excluding not just star.sas7bdat. We might want to go back into that folder and be more comprehensive and exclude star.sas7 because there are indexes, there could be other data files that might be relevant to exclude. The .git ignore should grow to include anything that might be data related. So in some cases, we could exclude some Excel files if they're data related. And that's where naming conventions come really handy, that you keep something that has patient or private confidential information may be prefixed with a certain name like confidential. And so then you would exclude confidential star or something. It would exclude it from the Git repository process. So let's review. We've created a .git ignore that excludes links and symbolics to our data. We've removed anything that's star sas7 bdat and star sas7, and we've created folders to hold our syntax. And what that now does is it allows us to have relative name referencing. So if I create a live name statement, I can actually use like / and then a consistent path. And then another live name, it could be / and then a consistent path to my data. And what that really does is frees me up if I move from one machine to another or from one environment to another to be able to actually use the same layout and the same configuration. It's really, really useful. So let's actually commit this. I like to say record it because I'm actually locking it in. But so let's updates to repo with folders for other syntax and data shortcuts. So I'm going to commit that. And again, we see that published branch, right? All of these changes have been made locally on my machine. There is nothing communicating this to the remote repository. Let's take a look. So if we come to our remote repository, we find that SAS Global Forum example, there's nothing here that's been done yet. There's only one branch. We haven't done anything to it until we publish the branch. And once we publish that branch, there it goes. It's been published. Now we see the create pull request there. And over here, when we refresh this window, we now see that we have the same ability to create a pull request. We can see the two branches. There's that new branch that's been created. And if we go into that, we can see the actual parts that we just finished working on in our example. If we can go into the code, we can see the folders that we populated and then see the README files that we left there for us to follow and see an example of how that starts to look. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish our example of those two branches. We're going to create a pull request because we know we are proving this. And again, if we had a reviewer, if we had a teammate, they may participate in this, but this is so early on in a new repository that's not necessarily something we would need because we know we're setting it up for the first time. So a refresher here is we're taking what we've done with our commit in this branch called ZT folder layouts, and we're meshing it, we're merging it into the main branch. And so we're going to create that pull request. We'll now see the choices to either document further, continue to shore up the log and the history of what we're doing. We know what we've done is what we need to do because it's part of the initialization or the configuration of this branch and repository. So we're going to go ahead and merge that. We're going to confirm the merge. And this branch isn't needed anymore. Remember, we could let branches persist and continue further, but it makes no purpose. It makes no reason. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this branch because we're pretty much done with what we've done with that branch. So let's go back out and check out the repository. Now the repository only has one branch. We're on the main branch. The other branch isn't there anymore. And if you look, we have now meshed everything together. So the main branch has the updates from that earlier branch that we just meshed and merged with it. Let's look at our GitHub repository via GitHub Desktop. So here, I want to fetch the origin. I want to go ahead and pull back down what just happened. And the reason why remember, we're still on ZT folder layouts. And now this message changed to publish branch. The reason why is that once GitHub Desktop connected with the remote repository and noticed that the commit SHA indexing values have changed, my GitHub Desktop is indicating that the ZT folder layouts needs to be published because it doesn't exist anymore on the remote repository. And even if it did, the indexing of that commit key, that commit SHA, is now different. But let's switch over to the main branch, right? If you look here, the ZT folder layouts is 4 minutes old, but the main branch is 2 minutes old. That's because what we did to the main branch on GitHub is more recent. We merged it. So if we switch to the main branch, now the main branch is starting to show information that we've made the commit. I'm sorry, we've made the merge 2 minutes ago, and it's showing us those changes because it came from that other branch. It was part of what was meshed and merged into the main folder, and that's why it is now one and the same with the changes that happened on that ZT folder layouts. They're indistinguishable. They're merged. So we can still switch to that ZT folder layouts here, but it doesn't exist on the Git repository in our GitHub account. We would have to do a specific action to push or publish that branch out. So in that situation, one of the things that I do is I actually delete the branch. So we haven't touched upon what these choices are up here, but GitHub Desktop is giving us the ability to manage the Git commands and actually control what we're trying to do to keep our repository either locally or on our GitHub account in sync. So we can do things like see the repository lists or check the list of branches, very much like we were doing on our GitHub account. And in the repository, we can push things, pull things, very much like the prompts here are asking us to do. But for the branch, we can create a new branch like the prompts are asking us to do here. What I want to do with the branch is I want to delete a branch, right? I know that I don't need that ZT folder layouts. So I'm going to switch to my main branch. I'm going to fetch from my GitHub repository, my remote one again, just in case. And I know that my ZT folder layouts branch really doesn't serve a purpose. It was just meant to populate and create those code folders, the data links, the folder called data with the links. So I think at this point, I just want to clean it up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete a branch. Where are you? Oh, let me switch over to it so I can actually delete it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this branch. And it's asking me, do you want to delete this branch? This action cannot be undone. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I want to stipulate it can't be undone in terms of the deletion. But if we needed to, we can look and see the branches and our histories, again, through the pull requests. So let's see. Let's go back up here to our repository and look at our commits. And so we can come here and see what our branches looked like when we were actually doing those merges and that pull request. So there are ways to go back to what the state of our code looked like when we need to audit, check something out, review a condition of what something looked like when we ran it. So that, to me, this layout and this type of folder configuration has been really useful, really helpful. And I wanted to call out, in our example, we just made the commit where we have the code, data, and logs. Now, if you look at our actual repository, we just have the code. What we've done with our git ignore is we no longer carry over the links or the symbolics. And so we've shielded or protected our Git repository from actually including data that would clutter, violate contractual obligations, anything like that. So that's one of the reasons why, when you initialize a repository and you start working, you want to add in the .git ignore that's necessary to protect yourself from accidentally including way too many files in your initial setup. And we're going to go through an initial setup in a second, but you want to go ahead and create those little barriers with the .git ignore to make sure you don't over include and over commit things into your repository. So this is my preferred layout for code and syntax in order for us to kind of work with a diverse set of software syntax or software languages. And if anybody has a better recommendation or something that they've tried that works better, or if there's an issue with what I'm proposing here, again, type them up in the comments. Let me know, because I'm always looking for another way to do something or a better way to do something, or maybe somebody hits a snag that I haven't encountered myself, but I could be one or two iterations away from encountering some difficulties. That would be nice to talk with people about. And I hope this part is helpful. Our next part is, if we did a full cycle, what we're going to do is take some of the sample folders that I've provided and start to work in adding them and creating almost like a full mock-up rendition. Now that you've become familiar with, commits and branches and initializing a repository, we're going to go through a quick walkthrough of, you got a folder, we're going to put it into place, and we're going to lock it into Git. Thank you.